The hospital waiting room smelled exactly like I expected, strong bleach, hiding something metallic underneath. I sat in a hard plastic chair, watching the clock tick past 2 a.m. My grandmother Beatrice was somewhere behind those double doors in the ICU, recovering from a massive stroke. I was 32 years old, a freelance auditor, and for the last 4 hours, I had been completely alone. My parents, Thomas and Brenda, were supposed to be her primary caregivers. When Beatrice had her first minor stroke 2 years ago, they insisted she move in with them. They claimed it was out of love. They claimed they wanted to take care of her in her final years. But when the reality of her care became inconvenient, they claimed they were tapped out financially. That's when they guilt-tripped me into covering the $3,000 a month for her supplemental in-home nursing care. I agreed because I loved her and because I naively believed they were doing their best. I pulled out my phone and dialed my father's number for the 4th time. It rang straight to voicemail. I called my mother. Voicemail again. They weren't answering, and they definitely weren't here. I leaned my head against the cold cinder block wall, closing my eyes. I was exhausted. Tax season was looming. My own client deadlines were piling up, and my bank account was hemorrhaging money to cover the nurses my parents swore they couldn't afford. That's when my phone buzzed in my lap. I thought it was my mother finally returning my call. Instead, a notification flashed across the screen. It was from Zillow, an alert I had set up years ago when I briefly considered buying a house in my grandmother's neighborhood. I stared at the screen. The notification read, "New listing alert, 434 Oakwood Drive, Taipei." My breath caught in my throat. That was Grandma Beatrice's house, the beautiful 4-bedroom colonial she had lived in for 40 years. The house she swore she would never sell. I tapped the notification. My hand started to tremble as the page loaded. Active listing. Asking price, $650,000. The photos were stunning. They were professionally staged. The heirloom furniture had been cleared out. The walls were freshly painted. This wasn't a sudden, desperate listing. This had been planned for weeks. And it had just gone live while the owner was lying unconscious in an ICU bed. Before I tell you how I used my background as an auditor to unravel their scheme, freeze their assets, and completely humiliate them at the closing table, using a secret my grandmother trusted me with months ago. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you believe that family should be built on respect, not exploitation, drop a comment below, letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now let me explain exactly who I was dealing with. In my family, I wasn't the daughter. I was the ATM. My older brother Jason was the golden child. He was the charming, confident entrepreneur who was perpetually on the verge of his big break. He ran a struggling boat rental business that seemed to consume money like a black hole. His wife, Ashley, drove a luxury SUV they couldn't afford and belonged to a country club they never should have joined. My parents funded their lifestyle under the guise of helping Jason get on his feet. Meanwhile, I spent my 20s paying off my parents' credit cards, covering the property taxes they forgot to budget for, and subsidizing Grandma's medical care. "We're so lucky to have you, Chloe," my mother would say, usually right after I transferred another $1,000 to cover a bill. "Jason is just going through a transition. Once his business takes off, he'll take care of all of us. You just have to hold the fort down a little longer." I believed her, or maybe I just wanted to believe her. I lived in a cramped apartment, drove a reliable but ancient sedan, and clipped coupons so my family wouldn't sink. I thought that's what love was. I thought unconditional support meant sacrificing my own security for theirs. The morning after the hospital call, I confronted them. I drove straight from the ICU to their house. I found them sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and looking entirely unbothered. "Why is Grandma's house on Zillow?" I demanded, skipping a greeting entirely. My father didn't even look up from his iPad. "It's a clerical error, Chloe. A friend of mine is a realtor and he accidentally listed the wrong address." I stared at him. A clerical error with 20 professionally staged photos of the interior. My mother sighed, setting her mug down. "Don't be dramatic, Chloe. We're just exploring our options. The medical bills are piling up. We might have to liquidate." "I pay the medical bills," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I'm the one paying $3,000 a month for the nurses because you said you couldn't afford it. And we appreciate that, sweetheart." My mother said, her tone dripping with condescension. But things change. Now, how is Beatrice doing? We'll try to stop by the hospital this afternoon if Jason doesn't need us to watch the kids. They never showed up. Over the next few days, the reality of their betrayal started to crystallize. I realized they had stopped paying for Grandma's supplemental health insurance 2 months ago. They were letting her policy lapse while simultaneously trying to liquidate her only major asset. They were preparing to abandon her financially while draining the very equity she had built over a lifetime. They thought I was just the reliable workhorse. They thought I would blindly accept their lies, pay the nursing home costs, and stay out of their way. They completely forgot what I did for a living. I investigate financial discrepancies. I track missing assets. I find the truth hidden in the numbers, and I was about to find exactly what they were trying to hide. The morning sun felt entirely too bright when it finally pierced through the heavy glass windows of the intensive care waiting area. I had not slept a single minute. My body ached from the rigid plastic chair, and my mouth tasted like stale vending machine coffee and sheer anxiety. Grandma Beatrice was stable but unresponsive, tethered to a dozen humming machines that were currently doing the work her body could not. It was 10:15 when the elevator doors finally chimed and my parents stepped out into the corridor. They did not look like people whose mother was fighting for her life. My father, Thomas, was wearing crisp khaki trousers and a quarter-zip pullover, looking as though he had just stepped off the back nine of his local golf course. My mother, Brenda, walked beside him in a beige cashmere cardigan, holding a large iced latte from a premium coffee shop down the street. They strolled down the hallway with the casual, unhurried pace of people browsing a Sunday morning farmer's market. I stood up, my joints popping in protest. I stared at the condensation sweating on the outside of my mother's plastic coffee cup. They had stopped for coffee. My grandmother had suffered a massive stroke. I had been sitting here alone since 2 a.m, and they had stopped for iced lattes. "Well, you look absolutely exhausted, Chloe," my mother said as she approached, offering a sympathetic smile that did not reach her eyes. She took a slow sip of her drink. "The nurses said Beatrice is resting comfortably, so there was no need for us to rush and crowd the room." "How is she doing?" I did not answer her question. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket, unlocked the screen, and held it up directly in front of my father's face. The Zillow listing was still glowing brightly, showcasing the pristine, professionally staged photos of my grandmother's living room. "Explain this," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Explain why Grandma's house is actively listed for sale for $650,000, while she is lying unconscious 20 feet away from us." My father barely glanced at the screen. He let out a heavy, patronizing sigh, the exact sound he always made when he felt I was being overly emotional. "Chloe, you need to calm down," Thomas said, shifting his weight. "It is just a clerical error." Gary, my buddy from the real estate brokerage, was running some market comparables for the neighborhood. He must have hit the wrong button on the software and pushed the listing live by mistake. "It means absolutely nothing." I stared at him, feeling the absolute absurdity of his lie wash over me. "A clerical error," I repeated, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Gary accidentally hired a professional staging company. He accidentally cleared out 40 years of Grandma's antique furniture. He accidentally hired a professional real estate photographer to take wide-angle shots of her kitchen. That is one incredibly ambitious clerical error, Dad. My mother placed a manicured hand on my arm, her touch feather-light and entirely unwelcome. "You are overreacting, sweetheart. You always do this. You take a simple misunderstanding and blow it completely out of proportion. We are just exploring our long-term options. Beatrice is going to need a lot of care, and we simply do not have the liquid assets to cover it. We might have to liquidate the property eventually." "I am the one paying for her care," I snapped, stepping back to shake off her hand. "I have been transferring $3,000 to your checking account on the first of every single month to pay for her in-home nurses. You specifically told me that you were tapped out because of the property taxes. I am funding her care, Mom." Before she could formulate another excuse, the waiting room doors swung open again. Enter the golden boy. My older brother Jason strolled into the ICU waiting area, flanked by his wife Ashley. If my parents looked casual, Jason and Ashley looked as though they were heading to a country club brunch. Jason was wearing a tailored linen shirt, holding a box of expensive pastries. Ashley trailed behind him, her oversized designer sunglasses pushed up into her highlighted blonde hair, the keys to her luxury SUV dangling loudly from her manicured fingers. "Hey, little sister," Jason said, flashing his signature, charismatic smile. He offered me the pastry box. "Brought you a croissant? Figured you would be starving. How is the old girl holding up?" I looked at the box, then at my brother. Jason was 35 years old and had never worked a reliable job in his adult life. He ran a luxury boat rental business that was perpetually on the verge of bankruptcy. Every season, there was a new excuse for why the business was failing. It was the weather or the local economy or supply chain issues with boat parts. And every season, Thomas and Brenda bailed him out. While I spent my 20s living in a cramped studio apartment, clipping coupons and working 60-hour weeks as a freelance auditor to pay off my parents' mounting credit card debts, Jason was living in a different reality. My parents willingly funded his country club membership because, as my father loved to say, Jason needs to network with the right people to secure high-net-worth clients for his boats. They co-signed the lease on Ashley's $80,000 SUV because she claimed it was unsafe to drive their children in anything less. I was the family workhorse. I was the reliable, invisible spine that kept their financial lives from collapsing. When the roof on my parents' house needed replacing, they cried to me about living on fixed incomes, and I drained my emergency fund to pay the contractor. When Grandma Beatrice needed specialized physical therapy after her first minor stroke, I took on 3 extra corporate tax clients to cover the out-of-pocket costs. I did it because I believed them. I believed that family stepped up when things got hard. I believed that my parents were genuinely struggling and that Jason was just hitting a string of bad luck. I thought my sacrifices were keeping us afloat. I did not realize I was simply acting as a subsidy for their entitlement. "I cannot eat a pastry right now, Jason," I said, my voice tight. "We were just discussing why Dad's friend accidentally listed Grandma's house for sale." Jason didn't even have the decency to look surprised. He just shrugged, pulling a chocolate croissant from the box and taking a massive bite. "Yeah, well, real estate moves fast, Chloe. You have to be prepared." "Speaking of moving fast, Dad, I need to talk to you about the boat slips at the marina. The manager is threatening to pull my lease if I do not pay the slip fees by Friday. It is going to be about 12 grand. I felt the blood drain from my face. My grandmother was lying in a hospital bed, her life hanging in the balance, and my brother was asking for $12,000 to park his boats. "We will figure it out, son," Thomas said, patting Jason firmly on the shoulder. "Don't you worry about the marina. Let me make a few calls this afternoon. We have some capital freeing up very soon." Some capital freeing up very soon. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. He was talking about the house. He was standing right in front of me, confidently promising to fund Jason's failing business using the money he planned to steal from the sale of my grandmother's home. Ashley sighed loudly, tapping her foot on the linoleum floor. "I really hope we can get this sorted quickly. The hospital parking garage smells like bleach and despair, and we have a tea time at 2 o'clock. Chloe, you have this handled here, right? You are so good at the medical stuff." I looked at the 4 of them standing there. My family. They were a unified front of greed and delusion. They had completely compartmentalized my grandmother's tragedy, viewing it only as an administrative hurdle standing between them and a massive payday. They assumed I would just fall in line. They assumed I would stay in the hospital, hold Grandma's hand, pay the nursing home bills, and look the other way, while they dismantled her legacy to finance their luxury lifestyles. "I need to go speak to the medical social worker," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "I will handle things here. You all should go. You clearly have very important golf games to attend." My mother smiled completely, missing the sarcasm dripping from my words. "Thank you, sweetheart. You are always such a rock. Let us know if her condition changes." I turned my back on them and walked down the corridor toward the administrative wing. My hands were trembling, but not from grief anymore. The betrayal was burning through the exhaustion in my veins, replacing it with a cold, terrifying clarity. I needed facts. I needed to understand exactly how deep this deception ran. I found the hospital's clinical social worker, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Higgins, sitting in a cluttered office at the end of the hall. I introduced myself, explained my grandmother's condition, and asked to begin the paperwork for post-stroke rehabilitation care. "Of course, Chloe," Mrs. Higgins said, pulling up Beatrice's digital file on her computer monitor. "Let me just verify her insurance coverage so we can see which skilled nursing facilities are in-network. She has standard Medicare, but we need to check the status of her supplemental policy to cover the long-term rehabilitation costs." I nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. She has a premium supplemental policy. My parents manage the premiums. They set it up specifically to ensure she would have top-tier coverage in an emergency. Mrs. Higgins clicked her mouse a few times, her brow furrowing deeply. She leaned closer to the screen, adjusting her glasses. She clicked again, typing something rapidly into the keyboard. "Chloe," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice dropping to a gentle, apologetic tone. "I am looking at the clearinghouse data right now. Beatrice's supplemental insurance policy is inactive." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Inactive? That cannot be right. Please check again. My parents manage that account. The premiums are paid." Mrs. Higgins turned the monitor slightly so I could see the screen. "I am so sorry, dear. The system shows that the policy was canceled due to non-payment. The last premium was paid over 4 months ago. The policy officially lapsed 60 days ago. As of right now, she only has basic emergency coverage. Any long-term care facility or specialized rehabilitation is going to be entirely out of pocket." I stared at the red letters on the screen, reading inactive. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening violence. My parents had not just made a clerical error with a real estate agent. They had not just been careless with a bill. This was a calculated, premeditated financial execution. 4 months ago, they had deliberately stopped paying the premiums on the insurance policy that was designed to protect her. They knew that if she suffered another medical emergency, the lack of insurance would force the liquidation of her assets to pay for her care. But they never intended to use the house money for her care. They were letting her safety net completely collapse, abandoning her to the mercy of a broken healthcare system, while simultaneously transferring the equity of her home into their own pockets. They were going to leave her destitute, sick, and entirely dependent on the state, just so Jason could pay his marina fees and my mother could buy a luxury RV. They thought I would not notice. They assumed that because I had spent the last decade quietly absorbing their financial burdens, I would just blindly open my wallet and absorb this one too. They planned to dump the catastrophic out-of-pocket medical costs directly onto my shoulders, knowing I would bankrupt myself before I ever let my grandmother suffer in a substandard facility. I thanked Mrs. Higgins, my voice eerily calm, and asked her to print out the insurance lapse documentation. I folded the paper neatly and placed it into my bag. I walked out of the administrative office and stood in the quiet hospital corridor. I did not cry. The woman who used to cry over her family's selfishness had died the moment I saw that red inactive status on the computer screen. They thought I was just the obedient, silent workhorse. They thought I existed solely to clean up their messes and subsidize their failures. They completely forgot that I was a professional auditor. They forgot that I spent my entire professional life tracing hidden assets, uncovering financial fraud, and building airtight cases against people who thought they were clever enough to hide their tracks. My parents and my brother had just declared war on a dying woman. But they were about to find out that the family workhorse had finally stopped pulling their cart and had started building a trap. The lock on my apartment door clicked shut, sealing me inside my own quiet sanctuary. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter. The silence of my living room was a stark contrast to the sterile, humming chaos of the intensive care unit I had just left. I did not bother turning on the main overhead lights. I only switched on the small brass desk lamp in the corner of my living room, casting a warm glow over my dual monitors. I was no longer the exhausted granddaughter weeping in a hospital waiting area. I was back in my element. I was an auditor, and my family had just made the catastrophic mistake of leaving a paper trail. I booted up my primary computer. The fan whirred to life. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of cold water, and drank it straight down. The knot of anxiety in my chest had hardened into something cold and dense. It felt like a block of ice sitting right behind my ribs. My parents thought they could brush off a professional real estate listing as a clerical error. They assumed my brain worked like theirs, fueled by delusion, entitlement, and convenient excuses. They did not understand that my entire professional career was built on the fundamental principle that numbers do not lie. People lie, systems lie, family members lie with a smile on their face. But the documentation always tells the truth if you know exactly where to look. I sat down in my ergonomic desk chair and pulled my keyboard close. I did not need to guess what they were doing. I just needed to prove it. In the state where my grandmother lived, property records are public domain. You do not need a badge, a warrant, or a subpoena to access them. You just need the county clerk's web portal, a parcel identification number, and the patience to navigate a government database that looks like it was programmed in the late 90s. I opened a new browser window and navigated to the county registry of deeds. The screen loaded with a bright, institutional blue banner. I typed in my grandmother's street address, 434 Oakwood Drive. My fingers flew across the keys with heavy muscle memory. I had done this 1,000 times for corporate clients, tracing shell companies, finding hidden assets, and unraveling complex financial fraud. Doing it for my own family felt surreal, like performing an autopsy on someone you used to love. The search results populated in a neat chronological list. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against whatever I was about to find, and clicked on the property history. For 40 years, the record had remained virtually unchanged. There was a deed of trust from when my grandparents bought the empty lot. A mortgage satisfaction document from when they finally paid off the house 20 years ago. And a survivorship filing from when my grandfather passed away, leaving Beatrice as the sole and absolute owner of the property. It was a clean, honorable record of a lifetime of hard work. But right at the very top of the list, glaring at me in bold black digital ink, were two brand new filings. They were filed, sequentially stamped, and recorded by the county clerk just 3 days ago. The first document was labeled as a durable power of attorney. The second was a quitclaim deed. I stared at the screen, feeling the blood roar in my ears. I knew exactly what those two legal documents meant when paired together. This was not a family exploring options for long-term care. This was a hostile financial takeover. I paid the $6 digital access fee with my credit card and downloaded the files directly to my desktop. I opened the power of attorney first. The legal jargon was dense, but the intent was absolute and terrifying. This specific document granted my father, Thomas, unlimited and unchecked authority over my grandmother's entire financial existence. It gave him the legal power to empty her bank accounts, liquidate her retirement funds, sell her personal property, and most importantly, execute real estate transactions on her behalf. It stripped Beatrice of her autonomy and handed the keys to her life directly to the man who had deliberately canceled her health insurance. I scrolled down to the bottom of the second page to find the signature line. There it was, Beatrice's name signed in black ink. Underneath it was my father's signature accepting the appointment as her legal agent. I zoomed in on my grandmother's signature. I stared at the loops of the letters, the pressure of the pen strokes, the specific slant of the cursive. Then I looked at the date typed neatly next to the signature line. The date was exactly 14 days ago. It was a Thursday. A cold, sharp wave of nausea washed over me. I pushed my chair back from the desk, my hands suddenly shaking so violently I had to press them flat against my thighs to steady them. They forged it. They actually forged it. I did not just suspect it. I knew it with absolute, undeniable certainty. I knew it because I knew exactly where my grandmother was 2 weeks ago on that specific Thursday. She had suffered a severe adverse reaction to a new blood pressure medication. The visiting nurse had called me in a panic because my parents were supposedly unreachable, probably out shopping or playing golf. I had left work in the middle of the afternoon and rushed to her house. When I arrived, Beatrice was practically catatonic. The medication had caused a sudden dangerous drop in her blood pressure, leaving her dizzy, disoriented, and physically weak. She could not sit up in bed without my assistance. She could not hold a glass of water without spilling it down her chin. Her hands had been trembling so badly that I had to hold a spoon to her mouth just to get her to eat a few bites of applesauce. I had stayed by her bedside until 9 o'clock that night, holding her fragile, shaking hand until the medication worked its way out of her system and she finally fell into a deep sleep. The woman I cared for that day was physically incapable of holding a pen. She was cognitively incapable of reading a complex legal document. She absolutely did not sign a sweeping, durable power of attorney, handing her entire net worth over to her selfish son. My father had printed this document, signed his own name, and then deliberately forged his mother's signature on a day when she was lying in bed vulnerable and confused. I leaned forward and pulled the monitor closer. I studied the forged signature again with an auditor's critical eye. It was a good attempt. Someone had clearly practiced it on scrap paper before committing it to the legal document. The flow was too smooth, too confident for a 78-year-old woman recovering from a previous minor stroke. Beatrice's real signature had a slight distinctive tremor in the capital letters, a mark of her age and her declining fine motor skills. This signature was flawless. It was the work of someone trying very hard to make it look perfectly normal. But a forged signature on a legal document is completely useless without one crucial element. It requires a notary public to legally verify that the person signing was physically present, provided state-issued identification, and signed the document of their own free will. I scrolled down to the notary acknowledgement block at the very bottom of the page. The state requires a notary seal and a signature to make a power of attorney legally binding and accepted by the county clerk. I looked at the dark blue ink stamp pressed into the bottom corner of the page, sworn and subscribed before me on this day. The text read. Below it was the bold-stamped name of the notary, Bradley Jenkins. I said the name out loud in the quiet of my apartment. Bradley Jenkins. The name pinged around in my memory, triggering a sudden sickening connection. I closed my eyes, sifting through years of forced family dinners and tense holiday gatherings, listening to my brother Jason brag endlessly about his exclusive country club life. Bradley Jenkins was not a random bank employee. He was not an impartial legal professional working in a law office. Bradley Jenkins was Jason's golf buddy. He was the guy Jason always partnered with for the annual charity tournament. He was the guy who owned the slip next to Jason's failing boat rental business at the marina. Jason had mentioned him a dozen times usually, while bragging about the expensive cigars Bradley brought back from his overseas vacations. The conspiracy expanded in my mind, shifting from a desperate act by greedy parents to a calculated multi-generational crime. My father had not done this alone. Jason was the golden child, the one who constantly needed financial bailouts, the one who was currently begging for $12,000 to save his marina lease. Jason had provided the notary. He had likely brought Bradley directly to my parents' house, or perhaps they had simply forged the document at the kitchen table, and Jason had taken it to Bradley to get it illegally stamped behind closed doors. They had all sat around and conspired to steal a dying woman's home. My father forged the signature. Jason secured the fraudulent notary. My mother provided the cover story about a clerical error to keep me distracted. They were a syndicate of entitlement. I minimized the power of attorney and opened the second document, the quitclaim deed. Now that my father possessed a fraudulently notarized power of attorney, he had the legal mechanism to do whatever he wanted. And what he wanted was immediate, undeniable ownership of the asset. The quitclaim deed was brief and devastating. Using the absolute authority granted by the forged power of attorney, my father had transferred the deed of the house on Oakwood Drive directly from Beatrice's name into his own name. He had essentially sold the house to himself for $0. The deed was signed by Thomas, acting as the appointed agent for Beatrice. It was, of course, notarized by the exact same man, Bradley Jenkins. Once the deed was recorded, with the county, Thomas was legally the sole owner of the property. That was exactly why the house was active on Zillow. My father was not exploring long-term care options for my grandmother. He was liquidating a massive asset he had already stolen. He had successfully bypassed the probate process, bypassed any future inheritance claims, and completely stripped my grandmother of the equity she had spent 40 years building with her own hands. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. They were actively committing multiple federal and state felonies: real estate fraud, forgery, elder abuse, notary fraud. They were risking severe prison time all because they believed they were inherently entitled to a lifestyle they had not earned, and because they honestly believed I was too stupid and too submissive to catch them. I sat back in my chair and looked at the digital trail of their crimes glowing brightly on my monitors. They had factored in my blind loyalty. They had factored in my lifelong willingness to write checks to save the family. They had calculated that I would be so completely distracted by the emotional weight of managing Beatrice's medical care in the ICU that I would never think to look at the county property records. They assumed I would just keep paying the $3,000 a month for her nursing care out of my own pocket, completely unaware that the very house that could have funded that care was being sold right out from under us to buy a luxury recreational vehicle and pay off a commercial boat lease. I felt a strange, terrifying calm wash over me. The tears were gone. The bone-deep exhaustion I had felt in the hospital had completely evaporated. They thought they were dealing with the family workhorse, the reliable, invisible daughter, who just fixed problems and stayed quiet so everyone else could be happy. They had severely underestimated the kind of pure, focused rage that is born from absolute betrayal. I did not want to just call the real estate agent and stop the sale. Stopping the sale would only result in endless excuses and manipulative tears. My mother would cry, my father would claim it was a massive misunderstanding, and Jason would distance himself completely, leaving me to clean up the mess. No. Stopping them was not enough. I wanted to dismantle them. I wanted to let them walk right up to the finish line. Let them taste the money, let them commit to their expensive new purchases, and then I wanted to pull the ground completely out from under them in a way they would never, ever recover from. I reached for my mouse and created a new encrypted folder on my hard drive. I named it Project Beatrice. I dragged the fraudulent durable power of attorney and the quitclaim deed into the folder. I backed the folder up to a secure cloud server. Then I grabbed my phone and found a photo I had taken 2 weeks ago on that exact Thursday. It was a picture of my grandmother lying in bed, a time-stamped image showing her fragile, bruised hand resting on a woven blanket, physically incapable of gripping anything, let alone signing away her life. I uploaded that incontrovertible proof to the folder as well. My family had built a towering house of cards on a foundation of forgery, greed, and arrogance. They believed they were untouchable. They believed they were the smartest people in the room. But they forgot that I was the one who always balanced the books, and I was about to ensure that every single one of their debts was paid in full. I could have picked up my phone right then and screamed at them. I could have dialed the police and reported the forgery. The impulse was right there, burning in the back of my throat and begging to be released. But screaming is what victims do when they have no other leverage. Screaming gives the enemy time to prepare their defense. It gives them time to destroy the evidence and twist the narrative to make you look like the unstable one. I'd spent my entire life being managed by my parents and their emotional manipulation. If I confronted them now with nothing but downloaded county records and raw fury, my mother would cry. My father would tell me I was imagining things. Jason would somehow make himself the ultimate victim. I needed more than digital footprints on a government website. I needed to know exactly how deep their delusion ran and what they actually planned to do with the stolen money. I grabbed my coat and my car keys. The drive to my parents' house took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours, suspended in a silent vacuum. The rain from earlier in the week had cleared and left the suburban streets slick and glittering under the streetlights. This was the neighborhood I grew up in. Manicured lawns and 2-car garages projected the quiet and comfortable illusion of middle-class respectability. My parents had always obsessed over keeping up appearances. They spent money they did not have to ensure the neighbors thought they were thriving. But as I navigated the familiar turns, the houses looked different to me. They looked like stage sets built entirely on lies. I did not park in their driveway. I was not there for a family visit. I parked my ancient sedan 2 blocks away and tucked it behind a neighbor's large oak tree out of sight from my parents' front windows. The air was crisp and biting at my cheeks as I walked the remaining distance. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was completely still. The emotional granddaughter had vanished. The professional auditor had taken over. I was entering a hostile environment to conduct a quiet and undocumented investigation. Their house was brightly lit. The warm and inviting glow spilled out onto the front lawn. It was a stark contrast to the cold reality of what they had just done to my grandmother. I walked up the driveway with my footsteps silent on the damp concrete. I avoided the front porch and slipped along the side of the house toward the back patio. The motion sensor light had been broken for months. It was something my father had complained about endlessly, but never bothered to fix. Tonight, his laziness was my greatest advantage. I had a spare key to the back door. They had given it to me years ago so I could come over and feed their golden retriever when they took spontaneous weekend trips. I slid the key into the lock and turned it with excruciating slowness. The deadbolt clicked open with a soft thud that sounded deafening in the quiet night. I pushed the door open just enough to slip inside and closed it silently behind me. I was standing in the mudroom surrounded by my mother's expensive gardening boots and my father's pristine golf clubs. The house smelled like cinnamon vanilla candles and roasted garlic. It was the exact smell of a comfortable and undisturbed evening. It was a normal family dinner. While Beatrice lay tethered to life support machines in a sterile hospital room, the people who had just stolen her entire net worth were enjoying a home-cooked meal. I slipped off my shoes and left them by the door. In my socks, I moved down the hallway toward the kitchen. The architecture of the house was open concept, which meant sound traveled easily. I did not have to get too close. I just needed to reach the dark dining room. That spot offered a perfect and unobstructed view into the brightly lit sunroom where they usually sat after dinner. As I pressed my back against the cool dining room wall, the voices became perfectly clear. They were not whispering. They were not speaking in the hushed and guilty tones of people who had just committed a massive felony. They were loud. They were animated. They were celebrating. "I am telling you, the market is completely hot right now," my father was saying. I heard the unmistakable clink of ice in a crystal tumbler. Gary said the listing already has 3 showings scheduled for tomorrow morning. At $650,000, it is aggressively priced for that zip code. We might even get a bidding war going before the weekend. "Thank goodness," my mother replied. Her voice was light and airy and completely devoid of the heavy concern she had faked at the hospital. The staging company did a phenomenal job. Getting all of Beatrice's old and gloomy furniture out of there completely transformed the space. It actually looks like a modern home now, instead of a museum. I closed my eyes and felt a sudden wave of nausea. They had not just listed the house. They had systematically erased 40 years of my grandmother's life. They had thrown away her antique rocking chair. They had removed the hand-stitched quilts she kept on the sofa. They had cleared out the mahogany bookshelves filled with her favorite novels. They had gutted her sanctuary while she was fighting for her life and dressed it up in neutral tones to attract wealthy buyers. "What about the closing timeline?" Jason asked. I peeked around the doorframe. My brother was lounging on the expensive leather sectional with a bottle of imported beer in his hand. Ashley was not there. This was just the inner circle. These were the architects of the fraud. "I need to know when the cash is actually going to hit the account." Jason continued. "The earnest money for the new house is due next week. Relax." My father chuckled and took a sip of his drink. "It is a cash market right now. Once we accept an offer, we can demand a 2-week closing. The title company Gary uses is incredibly fast. Since I have the power of attorney, there will not be any delays with probate or medical holds. The deed is already in my name legally. The equity is entirely liquid." "It is going to be so perfect," Jason said. He leaned forward, and his eyes gleamed with greedy excitement. "The new place in the gated community has a 3-car garage and a private dock on the lake. Ashley is already picking out patio furniture for the deck, and once the marina fees are paid off, the boat rental business is going to practically run itself." He was buying a luxury home in an exclusive gated community. He was using the stolen equity from a dying woman's house to fund a lifestyle he absolutely could not earn on his own. "You deserve it." my mother cooed. She reached over to pat Jason's knee with absolute affection. You have worked so hard to keep that business afloat. It is about time you had a break, and your father and I deserve a break too. That Class A motorhome we looked at on Saturday is still on the dealer lot. The salesman said he could hold it for us if we put down a $40,000 bridge loan. Once the house money clears, we pay off the loan and we hit the road for the summer. A luxury recreational vehicle. They were stealing $650,000 to buy a mansion for the golden boy and a luxury motorhome to travel the country. They were dividing up my grandmother's legacy, like pirates splitting plunder. They were completely detached from the human cost of their crimes. They spoke about the money as if it were a lottery winning or an unexpected windfall that the universe had rightfully bestowed upon them. There was a brief pause in the conversation. I heard my father pour another drink from the crystal decanter. Then Jason shifted on the couch. His tone changed slightly. He lost some of his arrogant bravado and replaced it with a momentary flicker of practical concern. "What about Chloe, though?" Jason asked. He took a slow sip of his beer and looked at my parents. She was asking a lot of questions at the hospital yesterday. She saw the Zillow listing on her phone. She is not an idiot. She works with numbers all day long. If she realizes the house is sold and the money is gone, she is going to lose her mind. "Have you figured out how you are going to spin this to her?" I held my breath. I pressed my hands flat against the dark dining room wall and waited to hear how they planned to manage me. I waited to hear if there was even a fraction of guilt or a tiny ounce of hesitation about destroying my financial future. I waited to hear if they felt any remorse for what they were doing to their own flesh and blood. My mother let out a soft and dismissive laugh. It was the exact sound she made when she found a sweater she did not like on a clearance rack. She did not sound worried at all. She sounded supremely confident. "Don't worry about Chloe. We'll tell her the medical bills ate up the house money. She's so used to paying for things, she'll just absorb the nursing home costs. She has no life anyway." My father nodded in absolute agreement. "Exactly. We tell her the long-term care facility required a massive upfront deposit, and the lawyers took the rest to settle the estate debts. She does not know anything about real estate closing costs. She will buy it without a second thought." The words floated through the quiet air and hit me with the physical force of a sledgehammer. She has no life anyway. Chloe realizes she is nothing but a financial beast of burden to them. I was not a beloved daughter. I was not a cherished sister. I was an appliance. I was a reliable and quiet machine that existed solely to generate funds and absorb their debts and clean up their endless messes. They did not just lack respect for me. They held me in absolute contempt. They viewed my lifelong sacrifices and my coupon clipping and my 60-hour work weeks and my quiet loyalty as completely pathetic. They weaponized my profound love for my grandmother. They counted on the absolute fact that I would bankrupt myself to keep her safe simply because they found it financially convenient for their own greedy plans. "She is a total workhorse," Jason chuckled. He validated my mother's cruel assessment without a hint of shame. "She will complain for a day and cry a little bit, and then she will just open her wallet like she always does. Just keep her distracted at the hospital, holding Grandma's hand while we get the closing done." "It is settled then," my father declared. He raised his heavy glass toward the ceiling. "To family, and to new beginnings." To family, my mother and brother echoed in unison. Their glasses clinked together in a sickening toast to their own depravity. I did not need to hear anymore. The ice block in my chest had frozen completely solid. The hurt was entirely gone. The shock had evaporated. What remained was a terrifying and absolute clarity that sharpened my vision. The family I thought I was trying to save did not exist. It had never existed. They had built their comfortable lives on a foundation of my silent suffering. Now they were attempting to build their luxury futures on the ashes of my grandmother's life. I backed away from the doorway and moved with deliberate and practiced silence. I retreated down the dark hallway, step by silent step, until I was back in the mudroom. I slipped my shoes back on. I opened the back door and stepped out into the biting night air. I closed the door and locked it carefully behind me. I walked back down the street to my car, parked under the dark oak tree. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors, but I did not start the engine. I sat there in the dark and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned completely white. They thought I was a naive workhorse. They thought I would just cry and absorb the catastrophic costs because I had no life. They thought they had successfully executed the perfect and untraceable crime, but they had made one monumental and catastrophic miscalculation. They forgot that you should never steal from a professional auditor, and they had absolutely no idea about the legal weapon my grandmother and I had quietly forged 8 months ago. They were busy planning their luxury futures and raising their glasses in celebration. They were completely unaware that I was about to trap them in a financial nightmare they would never wake up from. The interior of my car was freezing, but I could not bring myself to turn the key in the ignition. I sat there in the dark, parked 2 blocks away from my parents' house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles throbbed with a dull ache. The echo of my mother's casual, airy laughter still rang in my ears. She has no life anyway. The words looped through my mind over and over, playing like a broken record in the quiet space of my sedan. For 20 solid minutes, I just sat there and let the tears fall. They were not the soft, sorrowful tears of a grieving granddaughter mourning a family tragedy. They were hot, bitter tears of pure, absolute humiliation. I wept for the entire decade of my 20s that I had spent trying to buy their love with my quiet obedience and my hard-earned paycheck. I wept for the vacations I never took, the relationships I neglected, and the emergency savings I repeatedly drained to keep their carefully curated suburban lives afloat. But most of all, I wept because they thought I was completely stupid. I reached blindly into the depths of my leather work tote to find a tissue. As I rummaged through the receipts and pens, my fingers brushed against a heavy, cold piece of metal at the very bottom of the bag. It was a brass keychain cast in the shape of a vintage skeleton key. My breath hitched sharply in my throat. I pulled it out and stared at it under the dim orange glow of the street lamp overhead. Suddenly, the suffocating weight pressing down on my chest began to lift, evaporating into the cold night air. It was instantly replaced by a surge of adrenaline so powerful and so sharp that it made my fingertips tingle. My parents thought they held all the cards. They thought my father's forged power of attorney was the ultimate legal trump card that would hand them a $650,000 jackpot. They thought they had successfully executed a flawless financial crime against a dying woman. But looking at that heavy brass key, I remembered a rainy Tuesday afternoon exactly 8 months ago. A day that my parents and my golden child brother knew absolutely nothing about. It was early March. Grandma Beatrice had called me on my lunch break, her voice carrying an urgency I rarely heard. She asked me to leave work early and pick her up. She specifically instructed me not to tell my parents, not to mention it to Jason, and to park my car around the block so the neighbors would not mention my visit to my mother. When I arrived at her house on Oakwood Drive, she was waiting on the front porch. She was wearing her best tailored Sunday coat, a string of authentic pearls, and an expression of absolute terrifying determination. She did not want to go to the grocery store or the pharmacy. She directed me to navigate straight into the downtown financial district, guiding me to a sleek, towering glass office building that housed some of the most expensive corporate attorneys in the city. We took the mirrored elevator to the top floor and walked into the polished mahogany reception area of an elite estate planning firm. We were immediately ushered into the corner office of Mr. William Sterling, a senior partner with sharp silver hair and discerning eyes that seemed to miss absolutely nothing. Grandma Beatrice sat perfectly straight in her oversized leather chair. She did not mince her words, and she did not try to protect her family's reputation. She looked directly across the desk at Mr. Sterling and spoke with chilling clarity. "My son Thomas is simply waiting for me to die," she had said, "and my grandson Jason is waiting for Thomas to hand him my money. If I fall ill, if my mind begins to wander, or if I lose my physical independence, they will not protect me. They will sell the roof over my head to fund their own delusions of grandeur. I need a fortress, Mr. Sterling. I need you to build a legal wall around my home that my greedy son can never, ever climb. I had sat there in stunned silence as Mr. Sterling outlined the strategy. He explained the profound legal difference between a standard last will and testament irrevocable trust and the ultimate financial shield, an irrevocable living trust. By modern American legal standards, placing a piece of real estate into an irrevocable trust removes it completely and permanently from your personal estate. You no longer own the house as an individual. The trust becomes the sole legal owner of the property. And more importantly, the defining feature of an irrevocable trust is that you cannot change your mind later. It is permanent. It is an ironclad legal vault. Once the ink is dry and the new deed is recorded with the county, no standard power of attorney, no matter how broadly it is written or how aggressively it is enforced, can ever touch the assets secured inside that trust. Only the legally appointed trustee has the authority to manage, sell, or transfer the property. Grandma Beatrice had smiled a sad, knowing smile at that explanation. She spent 3 hours signing a towering stack of dense legal paperwork that afternoon. She legally transferred the deed of her beautiful 4-bedroom colonial home on Oakwood Drive directly into the Beatrice family irrevocable trust. And without a moment of hesitation, she named me her quiet, reliable, invisible workhorse of a granddaughter as the sole active trustee and the sole beneficiary. When we walked out of that glass building and back into the rainy afternoon, Mr. Sterling had handed me the heavy brass skeleton keychain as a commemorative token from the firm. "Keep this safe," Chloe Grandma Beatrice had told me as I helped her into the passenger seat of my car. "And keep your mouth firmly shut. Let them think they know everything about my finances. Let them assume they are in control. A silent watchman is always the most dangerous person in the room." Sitting in my freezing car 8 months later, that memory washed over me like a tidal wave of pure, unfiltered vindication. I wiped the remaining tears from my face and let out a short, sharp laugh that fogged the cold window glass. The sheer, blinding arrogance of my parents was staggering. They had spent the last 2 weeks plotting what they believed was the perfect, untraceable crime. My father had carefully forged my grandmother's signature on a durable power of attorney. He had convinced Jason's corrupt golf buddy to illegally notarize it. He had taken that fraudulent document down to the county clerk and used his fake authority to file a quitclaim deed, transferring the house into his own personal name. He honestly thought he was a genius. He thought he had successfully bypassed the probate courts, outsmarted the medical system, and secured a massive cash payout to fund Jason's luxury gated community mansion and his own ridiculous recreational vehicle. But my father had made a catastrophic legal error. He had forged a document giving him control over Beatrice's personal, individual assets. And Beatrice did not own the house on Oakwood Drive anymore. The trust owned the house. My father had legally attempted to steal and sell a piece of real estate that simply did not belong to the woman whose name he had forged. The fraudulent quitclaim deed he filed was completely void. It was worth less than the ink used to print it. As a professional auditor, I knew exactly how this would play out. The title company managing the sale for the new buyers would eventually flag the massive discrepancy. When they ran a deep historical title search just before closing day, they would see the irrevocable trust recorded 8 months prior. The legal system would catch the fraud on its own. The title agent would simply call my father, inform him that he did not have the authority to sell a trust-owned property, and cancel the transaction. But as I gripped the steering wheel, a darker, colder realization settled over me. If the title company quietly stopped the sale behind the scenes, my father would panic. He would immediately backtrack. He would play the victim, claim it was a massive clerical misunderstanding by his real estate friend, and slink away without facing any real consequences. He would escape the trap before the jaws could ever snap shut. And worse, he would immediately start looking for a different way to drain my grandmother's remaining liquid bank accounts to get the cash he felt entitled to. I could not let that happen. Stopping the sale early was no longer enough. I needed my parents to commit to the crime fully publicly and irreversibly. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and the heater finally blasted warm air across my frozen hands. I drove straight back to my apartment, locked the deadbolt, and opened my laptop. I did not sleep a single minute that night. I drank 3 cups of black coffee and meticulously organized every piece of evidence I had gathered into a digital portfolio. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, I dialed Mr. Sterling's direct office line. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and professional. I did not bother with pleasantries. I explained everything in rapid clinical detail. I told him about the severe stroke, the lapse in the supplemental health insurance, the active Zillow listing, and the forged documents I had pulled directly from the county registry website. I told him about overhearing their plan to buy a mansion and an RV using the stolen funds. I heard a sharp, furious intake of breath on the other end of the line. Mr. Sterling was a man who handled high-net-worth estates and complex family trusts. He possessed a deep, fundamental hatred for financial predators, especially familial ones who targeted the elderly and the vulnerable. "Chloe, Mr. Sterling," said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "What your father has done crosses the line from a nasty civil family dispute straight into federal criminal territory. Forging a signature to transfer the deed of real estate is felony fraud. Attempting to sell that stolen property and move the illicit funds across state banking lines constitutes federal wire fraud. We have a legal obligation to act. If we alert the title company and the listing broker today, we can stop the sale immediately. We can lock down the asset, but your father might be able to scramble his way out of severe criminal exposure by claiming ignorance or claiming your grandmother signed it before her stroke." I stood by my living room window, looking out at the morning traffic moving slowly through the city streets. My mind was perfectly clear. The girl who used to clip coupons and work 60-hour weeks just to pay her parents' credit card bills was entirely gone. "I do not want to stop the sale today." "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice eerily steady and devoid of any warmth. "I want them to walk into the title company office. I want them to sit down with the buyers. I want them to sign the final closing disclosures. I want them to legally declare under penalty of perjury that they hold the lawful right to sell that house. I want them to try and take the money. I want them to dig a hole so incredibly deep that they can never, ever climb out of it." Mr. Sterling was quiet for a long, heavy moment. The silence stretched across the phone line. When he finally spoke, I could hear a profound sense of respect mixed with a warning in his tone. "You are playing a very dangerous, very high-stakes game, Chloe," he cautioned gently. "If you let them sit down at that closing table, you are actively letting them walk right into a federal trap. Once they put their signatures on those final closing disclosures in front of a licensed closing attorney, the fraud is fully executed. There is no claiming a misunderstanding after that. There is no walking it back. They will face total financial ruin and, very likely, severe criminal prosecution. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed this way? These are your parents. This is your brother." I closed my eyes. I thought about my mother laughing in her brightly lit sunroom, happily sipping wine, while stating I had no life anyway. I thought about Jason casually eating a chocolate croissant in the intensive care waiting room, begging for $12,000 to save his boat lease, while his grandmother fought for her next breath. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had eagerly transferred every single month, genuinely believing I was being a good daughter and saving my struggling family, when in reality, I was just a blind workhorse funding my own exploitation. I am absolutely certain I told the attorney, my resolve hardening into solid steel. They made their choice when they deliberately canceled her health insurance. They made their choice when they decided to abandon a dying woman to buy a luxury motorhome. I am simply holding the door open so they can walk all the way through it. Mr. Sterling agreed to represent me in my official capacity as the sole trustee of the Beatrice Family Irrevocable Trust. He outlined the precise steps we needed to take. I was to go back to the hospital, sit by my grandmother's bedside, and play the role of the exhausted, emotionally devastated, clueless daughter perfectly. I was to say absolutely nothing about the Zillow listing, the trust, or the forged documents. I was to let my parents continue their arrogant charade. I was to watch them spend money they did not actually have, completely confident that their massive payday was guaranteed to clear on Friday. I was to let them sign the bridge loans, commit the non-refundable earnest money, and count their unhatched chickens. The legal trap was officially set. The irrevocable trust was a weapon they could not see coming. The bait was laid out perfectly on the closing table. All I had to do now was maintain my absolute silence, play the obedient scapegoat for a few more days, and watch the predators confidently walk right into the cage they had built for themselves. The morning light filtering through my apartment window felt harsh and unforgiving. I sat at my kitchen island with a mug of black coffee that had gone stone cold hours ago. The digital files from the county registry were still glowing brightly on my laptop screen. The forged power of attorney, the fraudulent quitclaim deed, they were absolute, undeniable proof of my family's moral bankruptcy. At exactly 8 o'clock, I picked up my phone and dialed the direct office line for Mr. William Sterling. He was the estate attorney Grandma Beatrice and I had secretly met with 8 months prior to establish her irrevocable living trust. Mr. Sterling was a man who navigated the legal world with the quiet and ruthless precision of a seasoned predator. He did not tolerate fools, and he harbored a deep professional hatred for people who exploited the elderly. The phone rang twice before his secretary answered and immediately transferred me. When Mr. Sterling picked up, I did not lead with my tears or my heartbreak. I am a professional auditor. I led with the timeline and the facts. I told him about my grandmother's severe stroke and her critical condition in the intensive care unit. I explained how my parents had deliberately allowed her supplemental health insurance to lapse 2 months ago, engineering a manufactured financial crisis. Then, I detailed the active real estate listing, asking for $650,000. Finally, I told him about the documents I had pulled from the public portal. A durable power of attorney dated on a day when Grandma Beatrice was heavily medicated and physically incapable of holding a pen. A flawless forgery executed by my father and illegally notarized by a man who regularly played golf with my brother Jason. Mr. Sterling remained completely silent on the other end of the line while I laid out the evidence. The silence stretched for several long, heavy seconds after I finished speaking. When he finally exhaled, it was a sharp and angry sound that crackled through the phone speaker. "Chloe," he began, his voice dropping into a low and dangerous register. "What you are describing crosses the boundary of a nasty civil family dispute and moves directly into federal criminal territory. Your father has not just made a poor ethical choice. Forging a signature to transfer the deed of real estate is felony fraud. Attempting to sell that stolen property and move the illicit funds across state banking lines constitutes federal wire fraud. We have a legal obligation to act on this immediately." He explained the fatal miscalculation my father had made. An irrevocable living trust is not a suggestion or a temporary arrangement. It is a permanent financial fortress. By transferring the deed of the house into the trust 8 months ago, Grandma Beatrice had legally removed the property from her personal individual estate. The house simply did not belong to her anymore as an individual. It belonged exclusively to the trust, and I was the sole active trustee. Therefore, my father's forged power of attorney, which only granted him fraudulent control over her personal assets, was completely useless against the property on Oakwood Drive. My father had filed a quitclaim deed to sell a house that the forged signature had absolutely no legal authority over. The title company managing the sale for the new buyers is eventually going to flag this discrepancy, Mr. Sterling explained patiently. When they run a deep historical title search right before closing day, they will see the irrevocable trust recorded on the county ledger 8 months prior. The legal system will catch the fraud on its own. The title agent will call your father, inform him that he does not have the authority to sell a trust-owned property, and cancel the transaction. But we do not have to wait for that. I can call the listing broker and the title agency right now. We can lock down the asset before lunch and shut this entire circus down today. I stood up and walked to my living room window, looking down at the morning traffic crawling along the wet pavement. I thought about the conversation I had overheard the night before. I remembered my mother laughing in her brightly lit sunroom, happily sipping wine while planning to buy a luxury recreational vehicle with stolen money. I remembered her saying that I had no life anyway, completely confident that I would just absorb the catastrophic nursing home costs like a good little workhorse. If Mr. Sterling stopped the sale today, my father would panic. He would immediately backtrack and play the victim. He would claim that the real estate listing was a massive clerical misunderstanding by his broker friend. He would blame the forged documents on a paperwork error. He would slink away without facing any real consequences, escaping the trap before the jaws could ever snap shut. And worse, he would instantly start looking for a different, quieter way to drain my grandmother's remaining liquid bank accounts to get the cash he felt so entitled to. "I do not want to stop the sale today, Mr. Sterling," I said. My voice was eerily steady, stripped of all warmth and hesitation. "I want them to walk into the title company office. I want them to sit down at the mahogany table with the buyers. I want them to sign the final closing disclosures. I want them to legally declare, under penalty of perjury, that they hold the lawful right to sell that house. I want them to try and take the money." Mr. Sterling was quiet again. The silence felt different this time, heavy with the weight of what I was asking. "You are playing a very dangerous and very high-stakes game, Chloe," he cautioned gently. "If you let them sit down at that closing table, you are actively letting them walk right into a federal trap. Once they put their signatures on those final closing disclosures in front of a licensed closing attorney, the fraud is fully and irreversibly executed. There is no claiming a misunderstanding after that point. There is no walking it back with an apology. They will face total financial ruin and very likely severe criminal prosecution. These are your parents. This is your brother. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed this way?" I am absolutely certain, I told him, my resolve hardening into solid steel. They made their choice when they deliberately canceled her health insurance. They made their choice when they decided to abandon a dying woman to fund their luxury lifestyles. They made their choice when they decided I was nothing but a financial beast of burden meant to absorb their debts. I am simply holding the door open so they can walk all the way through it. Mr. Sterling agreed to represent me in my official capacity as the sole trustee of the Beatrice Family Irrevocable Trust. He laid out the strict rules of engagement I needed to follow for the next few days. I was to go back to my daily routine. I was to sit by my grandmother's bedside at the hospital and play the role of the exhausted, emotionally devastated, completely clueless daughter. I was to say absolutely nothing about the Zillow listing the trust or the forged documents. I had to let my parents continue their arrogant charade. I had to watch them spend money they did not actually have, completely confident that their massive payday was guaranteed to clear on Friday. The trap was officially set. The irrevocable trust was a weapon they could not see coming, and the bait was laid out perfectly on the closing table. All I had to do now was maintain my absolute silence and play the obedient scapegoat for just a little while longer. That afternoon, I drove to my grandmother's house on Oakwood Drive. My parents had texted me asking me to stop by and help them sort through some of Beatrice's personal items. When I walked through the front door, the physical reality of their greed hit me like a punch to the stomach. The house, which had been a sanctuary of warmth and history for my entire life, looked like a ransacked museum. Professional movers were already boxing up the antique mahogany bookshelves. The hand-stitched quilts my grandmother cherished were piled carelessly in industrial plastic bins. My mother was standing in the center of the living room, holding a clipboard and a roll of neon green auction stickers. She was wearing a tailored cashmere sweater and a pair of expensive slacks, looking entirely unbothered by the fact that she was dismantling her mother-in-law's life. My father was pacing near the front window, talking loudly on his cell phone with a recreational vehicle dealership, aggressively negotiating the delivery date for the luxury motorhome he planned to buy with the stolen house funds. "Oh, good you are here, Chloe," my mother said, offering me a tight and completely fake smile. "We are just trying to get ahead of things. The medical bills are going to be so overwhelming, and your father and I realized we need to start liquidating some of Beatrice's larger antiques to help cover the costs. It is heartbreaking, but we have to be practical. I looked at the neon green auction tag slapped unceremoniously onto my grandmother's vintage cherry wood rocking chair. It was the chair she used to sit in when she read me stories as a child. A white-hot spike of rage pierced through my chest, but I forced my facial muscles to relax. I channeled every ounce of professional composure I possessed. I let my shoulders slump forward slightly, adopting the defeated and submissive posture they expected from me. "I understand, Mom," I said softly, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor. "It is just really hard seeing it all boxed up like this. But you are right. We have to do what is best for her care." My mother patted my arm with condescending affection. "You are being so strong, sweetheart. We appreciate how much you are doing at the hospital. By the way, your brother is going to stop by later to take the silver dining set. He thinks Ashley might like it for their new house." "You do not mind, do you?" I did not mind, because I knew Jason was never going to live in that new house. I knew the non-refundable earnest money he was putting down on the gated community mansion was going to vanish into thin air by Friday afternoon. I knew my parents' bridge loan for their luxury motorhome was going to default the second the title company canceled the real estate closing. I was standing in the middle of a crime scene, smiling at the criminals and mentally calculating the exact moment their entire world would collapse. "Of course, Jason can have the silver," I said, forcing a small and agreeable smile. "I am sure Ashley will take great care of it." I spent the next 3 hours helping them pack. I wrapped delicate porcelain figurines in bubble wrap while my father bragged to a neighbor over the fence about the incredible cash offer they had just accepted on the property. I carefully boxed up 40 years of family photographs while my mother complained about the high cost of the staging company they had hired. Every time they told a lie about needing the money for medical expenses, I nodded sympathetically. Every time they handed me another box of heirlooms to carry to the garage, I took it without complaint. I went back to playing the obedient, clueless daughter, smiling as my parents packed up Grandma's heirloom furniture to sell at auction. I watched them count their unhatched chickens with blinding arrogance. I listened to them divide up the spoils of a life they had not built and a home they did not own. They were so consumed by their own entitlement that they never bothered to look closely at my face. If they had looked closely, they would have noticed that my eyes were completely dry. They would have seen the cold and calculating precision in the way I moved. They thought they had successfully marginalized me. They thought they had engineered the perfect scenario where I would shoulder all the emotional and financial burdens while they walked away with a massive cash windfall. They were so incredibly confident in their own superiority that they willingly handed me all the rope I needed to hang them. When I finally left the house on Oakwood Drive that evening, the sun was beginning to set, casting long dark shadows across the manicured suburban lawns. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine. I pulled out my phone and sent a brief one-sentence text message to Mr. Sterling. "The closing is scheduled for Friday at 10 in the morning." I put my phone away, put the car in drive, and headed back toward the hospital to sit with my grandmother. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the quiet sabotage was executing flawlessly. The family workhorse was finally steering the cart, and I was driving them straight off a cliff. The morning sun filtered through the massive stained glass windows of Oak Creek Community Church, casting warm, colorful pools of light across the polished wooden pews. It was a beautiful Sunday morning in the suburbs. The kind of morning where the parking lot is filled with freshly washed luxury sedans, and the air inside the sanctuary smells faintly of expensive floral perfume and roasted coffee from the fellowship hall. For my parents, Thomas and Brenda, this affluent suburban congregation was not just a place of worship. It was a stage. It was the ultimate social arena where they could project their carefully crafted image of middle-class perfection and moral superiority. I sat 2 rows behind them, wearing a simple navy blue dress, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I was playing the role Mr. Sterling had assigned to me. I was the exhausted, devoted granddaughter, carrying the heavy emotional burden of my grandmother Beatrice's severe stroke. I watched my parents work the room before the service began. My father wore his best charcoal gray suit, looking grim and deeply burdened. He stood in the aisle accepting sympathetic handshakes from other men in the congregation, nodding with the stoic bravery of a patriarch facing a terrible family tragedy. My mother was giving an Oscar-worthy performance. She wore a tasteful beige dress and clutched a lace handkerchief, dabbing carefully at the corners of her dry eyes every time a fellow church member approached to offer their condolences. They looked like the perfect grieving children. They looked like people who were sacrificing everything to ensure their aging mother received the best possible care. They did not look like people who had just forged a legal document to steal a dying woman's home. They did not look like people who were secretly planning to buy a luxury recreational vehicle with the stolen funds while leaving their mother destitute and uninsured. The service began with the usual announcements and hymns, but the real sickening display of hypocrisy was reserved for the pastoral prayer. Pastor Dave, a charismatic man with silver hair and a booming, compassionate voice, stepped up to the acrylic podium. He asked the congregation to bow their heads. He prayed for the sick, the struggling, and the community. And then he lowered his voice to a tender pastoral whisper that echoed through the silent sanctuary. "I want to take a special moment this morning to lift up the Whitford family," Pastor Dave said. "As many of you know, our dear sister Beatrice recently suffered a severe medical event. She is in critical condition and the road ahead is uncertain. But in the midst of this darkness, we are witnessing a profound testament to family love. Thomas and Brenda have stepped up in a way that truly honors the biblical commandment to care for our elders. They are making incredible financial and personal sacrifices. They are sacrificing their own inheritance, draining their future security to ensure Beatrice receives the around-the-clock medical care she desperately needs. Let us pray for their strength as they carry this heavy, expensive burden with such grace and selfless devotion." A collective murmur of sympathy and admiration rippled through the congregation. Several people sitting near my parents reached out to pat their shoulders. My mother buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking in a flawless pantomime of silent weeping. My father wrapped a comforting arm around her, bowing his head humbly. I sat frozen in my pew. My fingernails bit so deeply into the palms of my hands that the skin nearly broke. The sheer, unadulterated evil of it took my breath away. They had actually manipulated the pastor. They had fed him a sob story about sacrificing their inheritance to pay for medical care, securing the admiration and sympathy of the entire community, all while actively plotting to abandon Beatrice to the state the moment their fraudulent house sale closed. They were using the holy altar of their church to launder their reputation. I did not scream. I did not stand up and call them liars. The professional auditor inside my mind took complete control, building an impenetrable wall of ice around my raging emotions. Mr. Sterling had told me to let them commit to the fraud fully. I breathed in slowly, counting to 10, and watched the performance continue. I was gathering data. I was letting them dig a hole so deep they would never see the sunlight again. When the service concluded, the congregation moved out into the brightly lit fellowship hall for coffee and pastries. This was where the social dynamics of my family truly turned toxic. I stood near the coffee urns holding a paper cup of black coffee, blending into the background just as I had done my entire life. I watched as my brother Jason and his wife Ashley held court near the center of the room. Jason was the golden boy, and today he was glowing with a smug, untouchable arrogance. He wore a crisp linen shirt, sipping his coffee, while laughing loudly with a group of men from the church council. Ashley stood beside him, her designer handbag displayed prominently on her arm, her oversized diamond ring catching the fluorescent lights as she gestured wildly. They were completely unbothered by the fact that their grandmother was lying in a hospital bed tethered to life support machines. They had only one thing on their minds. I moved slightly closer, hiding behind a group of older women discussing the upcoming bake sale, and listened to Ashley's carrying voice. "It is just so stressful," Ashley was saying to a captive audience of 3 other young mothers. "But we are incredibly blessed. We are officially closing on the new house next week. It is in the gated community over by the lake. You absolutely must come to see it once we finish the minor renovations. The kitchen island is imported Italian marble. One of the women gasped in admiration. That sounds beautiful, Ashley, but wasn't the timing awful with Jason's grandmother getting so sick? Oh, it has been a nightmare. Ashley sighed, putting a hand to her chest. But Jason's parents insisted we move forward. They said Beatrice would want us to be happy and settled. Family is all about supporting each other, you know. Jason has been working so hard on his boat business, he truly deserves this upgrade. I stared at the back of Ashley's perfectly styled blonde head. She was bragging about a luxury home funded entirely by elder abuse. She was inviting people to admire a kitchen island purchased with stolen equity. Jason chimed in, stepping closer to his wife and wrapping an arm around her waist. It is going to be a tight turnaround, he bragged to the men standing with them. The housing market is ruthless right now. We had to move fast to lock down this property. I am wiring the final deposit on Wednesday morning so we can sign the closing papers on Friday afternoon. It is a massive cash layout, but you have to spend money to make money right. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitter liquid burn the back of my throat. I did not confront them. I stood in the fellowship hall, perfectly silent, recording the exact dates and the blatant lies in my mind. Jason was boldly confirming his timeline to the entire congregation, knowing Jason is placing non-refundable earnest money down on a house using the anticipated stolen funds. He was committing tens of thousands of dollars to a luxury real estate contract, absolutely certain that my father's fraudulent sale of Grandma Beatrice's home would clear the bank in time to cover his massive debts. He was risking everything on a foundation of forged signatures and illegal notary stamps. He was so blinded by his own entitlement, so completely convinced of his own untouchable status as the family favorite, that he was publicly locking himself into a financial contract he could never fulfill on his own. I watched my parents join Jason and Ashley. They formed a tight, smiling circle of deceit. My mother was laughing now, the fake tears completely forgotten, as she discussed the layout of Jason's new mansion. My father was proudly patting Jason on the back, the generous patriarch providing for his son. They were celebrating their successful crime in the middle of a crowded church hall. They felt entirely safe. They thought they had outsmarted the legal system. They thought they had successfully marginalized me, believing I was nothing more than an obedient workhorse too afraid of conflict to ever question their authority. I looked at them and I felt absolutely nothing but a cold surgical precision. The trap was fully set. The bait had been taken. They had tied the noose themselves using their own greed, their own lies, and their own staggering hypocrisy. All I had to do was wait for Friday morning. The hospital discharge process was a chaotic symphony of buzzing pagers, squeaking wheelchair tires, and frantic nurses. It was Wednesday morning, and the bright fluorescent lights of the intensive care step-down unit felt harsh against my exhausted eyes. Grandma Beatrice had stabilized. The immediate danger of the stroke had passed, but the real challenge was just beginning. The medical staff handed me a thick folder of discharge paperwork outlining a rigorous schedule of physical therapy, occupational therapy, and round-the-clock monitoring. Normally, this is the exact moment when families gather in a cramped hospital conference room, gripped by the terrifying financial reality of long-term medical care in modern America. This is when the panic sets in, when people realize that Medicare only covers a fraction of the cost, and that a quality nursing facility can drain a lifetime of savings in a matter of months. My parents had deliberately manufactured this exact crisis. They had purposefully let Beatrice's supplemental insurance lapse, knowing it would force a financial emergency. They had counted on the sheer panic of this moment to justify selling her house out from under her. They assumed I would be standing in this hospital corridor, weeping desperately, trying to figure out how to pay the bills, completely blind to their real estate fraud. But I was not weeping. I was completely calm. I had the full legal and financial power of the Beatrice Family Irrevocable Trust resting in my purse. I did not take her to a state-run facility. I did not put her in a substandard nursing home that smelled of bleach and despair. I had spent the previous afternoon touring a premier private rehabilitation center nestled on a sprawling wooded estate just outside the city limits. It was a place designed for healing and dignity. It featured massive floor-to-ceiling windows, private suites, a therapeutic garden, and a staff of incredibly compassionate nurses who actually smiled when they spoke. The monthly cost was astronomical. It was a staggering sum that would have bankrupted my parents in a week. But the trust accounts I secretly managed, the accounts my grandmother had wisely funded with her liquid investments 8 months ago, had more than enough capital to cover her stay completely. I handled the entire transfer myself. I hired a private, comfortable medical transport van to take her from the hospital to the new facility. I sat in the back with her, holding her fragile, bruised hand the entire ride. When we arrived, I personally unpacked her clothes and settled her into a beautiful private suite that looked more like a luxury hotel room than a medical ward. The sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, landing warmly on the fresh hydrangeas I had placed on her mahogany nightstand. I walked down to the administrative office and paid the first month in full using the heavy brass trust debit card. My parents were supposedly her primary caregivers. They had promised the hospital social worker that they would handle her transition and manage her care plan. But they were nowhere to be found. They did not show up for the discharge. They did not call to check on her condition during the transport. They did not even bother to ask for the address of the new rehabilitation center. I knew exactly why they were absent. The illusion of sudden wealth is a highly intoxicating drug, and my parents were currently on the biggest binge of their entire lives. That same afternoon, while I was fluffing my grandmother's pillows and speaking with her new occupational therapist, my father was sitting in the finance office of a premium recreational vehicle dealership across town. I discovered this because my mother simply could not help herself. The need to project an image of wealth to her suburban church friends and country club acquaintances was a compulsion she could not suppress. While sitting in the quiet corner of my grandmother's recovery room, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a notification from Facebook. My mother had posted a series of photos. The first was a wide-angle shot of a massive gleaming luxury motorhome. It was the size of a city bus, painted in sleek silver and charcoal tones with dark-tinted windows and chrome accents. The second photo showed my father sitting at a dealership desk, holding a pen over a stack of financial documents, grinning like a man who had just won the lottery. The caption read, "Making our retirement travel dreams come true today. The paperwork is officially signed. Just waiting for closing day on Friday to hit the open road." I stared at the photo, zooming in on the financial documents scattered across the dealership desk. As a professional auditor, I understood the reckless and dangerous mechanics of what they were doing perfectly. My parents did not have $40,000 in liquid cash to put down on a luxury motorhome. They were drowning in credit card debt. But my father had something he believed was just as good. He had the fraudulent quitclaim deed he had filed with the county clerk, legally transferring my grandmother's house into his name. He had taken that fraudulent deed and presented it to a predatory high-interest lender. He used the pending $650,000 house sale as absolute collateral to secure a massive bridge loan. A bridge loan is a short-term, incredibly high-interest financial instrument designed to bridge the gap between a major purchase and a pending sale. Lenders hand over the cash immediately, but they secure the loan against the borrower's primary assets. My father had borrowed $40,000 in hard cash to secure the motorhome, entirely confident that he could pay off the bridge loan in full the second the title company wired the real estate funds on Friday morning. He was borrowing against stolen equity. He was actively spending the money before the ink on the real estate contract was even dry. He was legally tying his own financial survival to a fraudulent sale that I knew for a fact was going to be canceled. The sheer blinding arrogance of it took my breath away. They were committing financial suicide with a triumphant smile on their faces. Over the next 48 hours, the tension in my chest began to stretch so thin I thought it might snap and take my sanity with it. I went to my parents' house on Thursday morning, the day before the closing. I used the excuse of dropping off some of Beatrice's forwarded mail, but I really just needed to observe the depth of their delusion. I needed to see them digging their own grave. When I walked through the front door, The house was a chaotic staging ground for their impending luxury lifestyle. Shipping boxes from expensive outdoor retailers and premium camping supply stores were piled high in the entryway. The living room looked like a warehouse for luxury travel gear. My mother was standing at the kitchen island, surrounded by a massive binder of fabric swatches, floor plans, and glossy brochures. She was wearing a crisp linen blouse and holding a cup of premium coffee, looking entirely unburdened by the fact that she had just abandoned a dying woman. "Oh, Chloe, look at this," my mother chirped the second I walked into the kitchen, completely ignoring the stack of mail I placed on the counter. "We are upgrading the entire interior of the motorhome. The standard factory upholstery is just so drab and depressing. I am having custom Italian leather seats installed in the captain's chairs, and we are upgrading the kitchen countertops to real granite." I looked at the expensive fabric swatches spread across the island. I thought about the $3,000 a month I used to transfer to her checking account. I thought about the years I spent clipping coupons, driving an old sedan, and working grueling 60-hour weeks because she claimed they were tapped out and desperately needed my help just to survive. Now she was throwing thousands of borrowed dollars at custom Italian leather seats for a vehicle she had no business buying. "Have you been to see Grandma Beatrice?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely neutral, forcing my facial muscles to remain perfectly still. "The new facility is very nice. She is starting physical therapy today." My mother waved her manicured hand dismissively, not even bothering to look up from her glossy design catalog. "We will try to pop over sometime next week, once things settle down. We are just so overwhelmed right now. The closing is tomorrow morning, and we have to be at the dealership by 3 in the afternoon to take delivery of the RV and supervise the interior upgrades. The parents don't even visit her. They are too busy picking out RV customizations." The pure, unadulterated selfishness of that statement hung in the quiet kitchen air. She was not even trying to hide it anymore. The mask of the devoted, sacrificing daughter-in-law had completely slipped off, revealing the greedy, entitled predator underneath. Just then, my father walked into the kitchen. He had a Bluetooth earpiece tucked into his ear, and he was speaking loudly, his voice booming with arrogant confidence. "Yes, Jason, I am telling you it is absolutely fine," my father said into the earpiece. "Go ahead and wire the earnest money. The funds from the Oakwood house are guaranteed. The title company confirmed everything this morning. We sign at 10, the wire transfer hits the account by noon, and I will transfer the cash to you immediately. Secure the house, son. You deserve it." My father tapped the button on his earpiece to end the call and grinned at my mother. "Jason is locking down the gated community mansion. He just wired a $50,000 non-refundable deposit to the builder." I felt a cold, sharp thrill race down my spine. Jason was doing it too. The golden boy was diving headfirst into the exact same trap. He was committing $50,000 of non-refundable earnest money to a luxury real estate contract, relying entirely on the success of my father's fraudulent sale. If the sale did not close, Jason would forfeit that $50,000, instantly plunging his already failing boat rental business into immediate catastrophic bankruptcy. They were all linked together by a chain of unprecedented greed. They were leveraging everything they owned and everything they thought they were about to steal on a single real estate transaction. If one link in that chain broke, the entire family would be pulled straight into the financial abyss. And I was holding the bolt cutters. "Is everything set for the closing tomorrow?" I asked my father, pouring myself a glass of cold water from the refrigerator to give my shaking hands something to hold on to. He grinned broadly, puffing out his chest with absolute patriarch pride. "Everything is perfect, Chloe. Gary says the buyers are wiring their final funds to the escrow account today. Tomorrow at 10 in the morning, we sit down at the mahogany table, sign a few standardized disclosures, and the equity is officially ours. We did it. We secured the family's future." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, letting the cold liquid soothe my dry throat. "Yes," I said smoothly, looking directly into his eyes. "You certainly secured something." I did not scream. I did not throw the glass of water in his face. I did not demand to know how they could sleep at night. Screaming would only give them a warning. It would only give them a chance to scramble to cancel the bridge loans to pull Jason's earnest money back before the deadline. I let them dig their own grave. I watched my mother flip happily through her expensive fabric samples, and I watched my father pace the kitchen floor drunk on the illusion of his own untouchable cleverness. They had taken out high-interest loans they could never repay on their own. They had signed binding financial contracts they could never fulfill. They had built a towering house of cards on a foundation of forgery, and they were actively inviting a hurricane inside. I left their house shortly after leaving them to their delusions of grandeur. I drove back to my apartment and sat down at my kitchen table. The late afternoon sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the hardwood floor. I pulled out my phone and dialed the direct office line for Mr. Sterling, the estate attorney. He answered on the first ring. "Chloe, are we still on schedule for tomorrow?" "We are," I told him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. They took out a $40,000 bridge loan against the property to buy a motorhome. And my brother just committed $50,000 of non-refundable deposit money on a new house. They are spending the cash before the closing even happens. I heard Mr. Sterling let out a low, breathy chuckle on the other end of the line. It was a sound of pure professional disbelief. They really are doing all the heavy lifting for us, aren't they? They are walking into a federal fraud trap and locking the door behind themselves. "They are," I replied quietly. "I will see you tomorrow morning at the title company." I hung up the phone and sat in the gathering twilight of my living room. Friday was coming. The trap was fully loaded, the bait was taken, and the leverage they had created against themselves was absolutely staggering. My family had spent my entire adult life treating me like a naive, obedient workhorse, fully expecting me to carry their heavy financial burdens and subsidize their endless mistakes. They honestly thought they could strip my dying grandmother of her dignity and her lifelong legacy, leaving me to blindly clean up the devastating aftermath while they drove off into the sunset in a customized luxury vehicle. They thought they were the smartest people in the room. But tomorrow morning at exactly 10 o'clock, they were going to sit down at a polished mahogany table, pen in hand, and finally realize that the quiet, invisible daughter had just locked the exits and burned the building to the ground. Friday morning arrived with a crisp and cloudless blue sky. It was the kind of day that felt entirely too bright for a funeral. But a funeral was exactly what this was. Not a funeral for a person, but the absolute permanent burial of my family's delusions of grandeur. I pulled my old sedan into the parking lot of the executive title agency just before 10 o'clock. My hands were perfectly steady on the steering wheel. I wore a tailored navy suit that I usually reserved for high-stakes corporate audits. Today, the stakes were entirely personal. I walked into the lobby and met Mr. Sterling near the reception desk. He carried a thick black leather binder under his arm. We did not exchange pleasantries. We did not need to. We just exchanged a look of absolute and unified purpose. The receptionist pointed us down a wide carpeted hallway toward the main conference rooms. Through the expansive glass walls of Suite B, I could see them. My family was holding court. My father Thomas was sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table. He wore his best charcoal gray suit, looking exactly like a triumphant chief executive officer who had just closed the deal of a lifetime. My mother Brenda was seated next to him, laughing brightly at something the real estate agent had just said. Her manicured hands were wrapped elegantly around a porcelain coffee cup. Jason and Ashley were there too, hovering near a catered pastry platter. They had absolutely no legal reason to be at this closing, but they simply could not resist being close to the money. They were all beaming. Across the table sat a young couple. They were the buyers, looking nervous, but incredibly excited to sign the papers for their new home. The title attorney, a woman with sharp glasses and a stack of color-coded files, was arranging the final disclosure documents. It was a picture of perfect lucrative success. They were counting the minutes until the wire transfer hit their accounts. They were already spending the cash in their minds, completely detached from the dying woman they had robbed to get it. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside. The heavy click of the door shutting cut through the cheerful chatter in the room. Every head turned toward the entrance. The smiles on my family's faces did not just fade. They shattered into a million pieces. My father actually dropped his expensive pen. It clattered loudly against the polished mahogany wood. Brenda's coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. Jason went completely rigid, his hand hovering uselessly over a blueberry muffin. "What are you doing here?" Chloe, my father, demanded. He recovered his voice quickly, but he completely failed to hide the sudden and sharp edge of panic in his tone. "This is a private real estate closing. You have absolutely no business being here. You should be at the hospital." I walked slowly toward the table, letting the silence stretch out, letting the tension wrap tightly around their throats. I looked at the young buyers, who were glancing back and forth between me and my father with growing confusion. Then I looked at the title attorney. "I have every business being here, Dad," I said. My voice was eerily calm. It carried the practiced authority of a forensic auditor uncovering a massive financial discrepancy. "I am here to protect the rightful owner of this property." My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. "Chloe, please stop this dramatic nonsense right now. You are embarrassing yourself in front of these nice people. Go back to the nursing facility and sit with your grandmother. We will handle the financial matters just like we always do." I ignored her completely. Instead, I stepped aside slightly and gestured to the silver-haired man standing right behind me. "For those of you I have not met," I said smoothly, "this is Mr. William Sterling. He is a senior partner specializing in estate law and complex family trusts. He is also the personal legal counsel for my grandmother, Beatrice." Mr. Sterling stepped forward and placed his heavy black binder directly onto the center of the mahogany table. The thud echoed in the quiet room like a gavel striking a judge's block. The title attorney adjusted her glasses, looking from the binder to Mr. Sterling with a mixture of professional caution and genuine alarm. "Sir," the title attorney said carefully, "we are in the middle of executing a finalized real estate transaction. The deed has been legally transferred via a durable power of attorney. The closing disclosures are ready for signatures." Mr. Sterling did not smile. He simply unclasped the binder and opened it to the very first tab. He slid a certified and heavily stamped document across the polished wood toward the title attorney. "You are in the middle of executing a federal crime," Mr. Sterling corrected her. His voice was low and incredibly dangerous. "I strongly advise you to put your pen down and review this document before you facilitate wire fraud." My father turned the color of wet ash. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the paper before the title attorney could reach it. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. His voice cracked with pure desperation. "I am the legal agent for my mother. I filed the quitclaim deed 3 days ago. It is all on the public record. My buddy Gary at the real estate brokerage cleared it." "Gary is an idiot who did not run a deep historical title search," Mr. Sterling replied coldly. He blocked my father's hand with effortless authority. The document Mr. Sterling had just presented was the irrevocable living trust. The title attorney picked it up. Her eyes darted rapidly back and forth as she scanned the dense legal text, the date stamps, and the notary seals. The color slowly drained from her face as she realized the catastrophic liability she was sitting next to. "What is that?" Jason demanded. His arrogant bravado was crumbling into raw, unfiltered fear. "Dad, what is he showing her? Tell them to get out so we can get our money." The title attorney looked up. Her expression had completely transformed from a polite facilitator to a horrified legal professional. She looked directly at my father. "Mr. Whitford," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "you presented this office with a durable power of attorney, granting you control over your mother's personal assets. But according to this certified trust document recorded 8 months ago, your mother does not own the property on Oakwood Drive. The trust owns it. You filed a quitclaim deed on a house you had absolutely no legal authority to claim." The silence in the glass-walled conference room became suffocating. The young buyers gasped out loud. They instantly realized their dream home was tangled in a massive legal nightmare. The real estate agent looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. My mother sank slowly back into her chair, clutching her chest as if she could physically hold her collapsing world together. "That is impossible," my father stammered. Sweat began beading heavily on his forehead. "My mother never set up a trust. I handle all her paperwork. She never told me about this." "She did not tell you," I said. I finally spoke directly to him, letting years of quiet resentment fuel my words. because she knew exactly what you would do if she lost her physical independence. She saw the greed in your eyes years ago. She knew you would try to sell her sanctuary from right under her while she was lying in a hospital bed fighting for her life. And she named me as the sole active trustee to ensure you could never touch a single dime of her equity. Mr. Sterling pulled a second document from his binder. He slid it right next to the trust paperwork. This was the trap officially closing its jaws. But the true tragedy here is not just your ignorance of the trust, Mr. Sterling said smoothly. The tragedy is your profound arrogance. This is a copy of the durable power of attorney you filed with the county clerk. The signature is dated exactly 14 days ago. He looked at my father with absolute, undeniable disgust. We have verified hospital records, nursing logs, and time-stamped photographic evidence, proving that Beatrice was severely incapacitated by medication on that specific Thursday. She was physically incapable of holding a pen, let alone executing a sweeping legal document. You did not just make a mistake with a trust. You committed forgery. The title attorney gasped out loud again. She dropped the paperwork onto the table as if it had suddenly caught fire. "You forged it," she whispered in absolute horror. "You brought a forged document into my office to sell a house you do not own. I cannot close this transaction. I am legally obligated to report this to the state licensing board immediately." She turned to the terrified young buyers. "I am so incredibly sorry. This closing is officially canceled." Panic erupted. True, unfiltered, and chaotic panic. Jason slammed his hands hard on the mahogany table. He knocked over a coffee cup that spilled dark brown liquid all across the final closing disclosures. "No, you cannot cancel it," Jason screamed. His face turned a bright, unhealthy purple. "The earnest money for my new house is due today. I already committed $50,000 of non-refundable cash. If this wire does not clear right now, I lose everything. I am going to be bankrupted. My boat business will go under by Monday." Ashley burst into hysterical tears. She clutched her designer handbag against her chest as the reality of losing her gated community mansion crashed down on her. "We were supposed to pick out the Italian marble kitchen island this afternoon," she sobbed, completely oblivious to the fact that her father-in-law had just been exposed as a felon. My father sat completely paralyzed. His mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out. He just stared blankly at the forged signature that had just destroyed his entire life. Brenda turned to me, her face contorted with a vicious and desperate rage. "How could you do this to us?" she shrieked. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "We are your family. We took out a $40,000 high-interest bridge loan to buy that motorhome. We used this pending closing as absolute collateral. We will lose our own house if this money does not clear today. You are a monster, Chloe. You have ruined us." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the woman who had happily sipped wine in her brightly lit sunroom while laughing about me having no life. I looked at the parents who had treated me like a silent workhorse, expecting me to quietly absorb the massive cost of a nursing home while they traveled the country on stolen money. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt nothing but cold surgical justice. "I did not forge a signature on a legal document, Mom," I said. My voice echoed clearly over her loud sobbing. I did not deliberately cancel a dying woman's health insurance policy. I did not attempt to steal a lifelong inheritance just to buy a luxury recreational vehicle. You ruined yourselves. You built a massive trap out of your own spectacular greed and your own staggering hypocrisy. You leveraged everything you owned on a crime you were too stupid to get away with. I just stood back and let you walk right into it. Mr. Sterling calmly gathered his documents from the table and placed them neatly back into his leather binder. "The federal authorities have already been notified regarding the wire fraud and real estate fraud attempts," he informed my father quietly. "I strongly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel immediately. You are going to need it." I turned my back on them and walked out of the conference room. I left them trapped in the glass walls of their own making. I walked down the carpeted hallway, listening to them scream at each other as their carefully curated lives burned entirely to the ground. The air in the glass-walled conference room turned so thick and heavy that it felt like drawing breath through a wet wool blanket. For a few agonizing seconds, nobody moved a single muscle. The young couple who had come to this office to buy their dream home sat frozen in their oversized leather chairs, staring at my father with a mixture of absolute disgust and profound pity. The title attorney was frantically packing her color-coded folders back into her leather briefcase, treating the polished mahogany table like it was a contaminated crime scene. But the real devastation, the true catastrophic collapse, was happening right in front of me. I stood perfectly still and watched the entire illusion of the Whitford family wealth shatter into a million jagged, irreparable pieces. Jason was the first to physically react to the bomb Mr. Sterling had just dropped onto the table. My older brother stumbled backward, his expensive imported leather shoes squeaking harshly against the hardwood floor. He pulled his phone from his tailored suit pocket with violently trembling hands and stared at the bright screen like it was a venomous snake about to strike. His $50,000 earnest money deposit for the gated community mansion was completely non-refundable. He had eagerly wired the cash to the luxury home builder just 24 hours earlier, using the absolute certainty of this fraudulent real estate closing as his personal safety net. Now that net had been completely vaporized. I watched the golden child, the brother who had never faced a single consequence in his 35 years of life, begin to hyperventilate. He grabbed his hair, pulling at the perfectly styled strands as his chest heaved. His boat rental business was already underwater, drowning in unpaid marina lease fees and massive credit card debt. He had just thrown $50,000 of borrowed cash directly into an incinerator. He looked up at my father with wide, terrified eyes, begging for a bailout that was never going to come. Then, the reality of the situation finally slammed into my parents. My father, Thomas, sank slowly back into his chair, as if the gravity in the room had suddenly doubled. His crisp, charcoal gray suit instantly looked 3 sizes too big for his shrinking frame. He stared at the voided quitclaim deed on the table, as his mind calculated the catastrophic math of his own blinding arrogance. Just yesterday afternoon, he had confidently sat in a dealership finance office and signed a $40,000 high-interest bridge loan to purchase a luxury recreational vehicle. He had used this exact real estate transaction, the stolen equity of my grandmother Beatrice's house, as the sole collateral to secure that cash. In the eyes of the predatory commercial lender, my father had just committed massive financial fraud. That high-interest bridge loan would default immediately when the title company failed to wire the funds today. The interest would begin to compound at a staggering daily rate. My parents had absolutely no cash reserves. They had maxed out their personal credit cards years ago, funding their country club lifestyle and subsidizing Jason's endless failures. Without the $650,000 from this fraudulent home sale, my parents were going to lose their own suburban house just to pay off the RV debt. They had aggressively dug a financial grave for a dying woman and willingly jumped into it themselves. The suffocating silence shattered when my mother finally found her voice. Brenda stood up so fast that her heavy wooden chair tipped backward and crashed loudly against the glass wall. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. The polished, polite suburban socialite was completely gone, replaced entirely by a cornered, desperate predator. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face, her eyes burning with hatred. "You are a thief!" she shrieked, her voice echoing terribly off the glass walls and spilling out into the quiet lobby. "You are a disgusting, ungrateful thief, Chloe. We took out loans for that motorhome. Jason wired his deposit for his house. We are going to lose everything because of your jealous, petty sabotage. You set us up to lose our home." I stood perfectly still. I did not cross my arms defensively. I did not raise my voice to match her hysteria. I did not offer a single tear. I just looked at the woman who had given birth to me and felt an overwhelming sense of profound emptiness. The icy composure that Mr. Sterling had advised me to maintain was not a performance. It was the natural byproduct of accepting that my family had never actually loved me. The little girl who used to clip coupons and work 60-hour audit weeks just to pay her parents' bills was dead. I am a thief. I repeated the word slowly, tasting the bitter, disgusting irony of it on my tongue. I stepped closer to the mahogany table, leaning my weight onto my hands and locking my eyes directly onto my mother's pale face. You deliberately canceled a dying woman's health insurance policy so you could force a manufactured financial crisis. You hired a professional staging company to throw away her antique furniture and erase her entire life while she was lying on life support. You planned to dump her into a state-run ward and leave me to pay her medical bills for the rest of my life. You did all of this so you could buy a luxury RV and travel the country. My mother opened her mouth to scream another vicious insult, but I cut her off completely, my voice dropping to a dangerous clinical whisper that commanded the entire room. You tried to sell a dying woman's home to buy an RV mom. The only thieves in this room are holding pens. Thomas finally found his voice. It was incredibly weak and dripping with pathetic pleading. "Chloe, please," he stammered, holding his shaking hands up in a gesture of total surrender. "We can fix this right now. We can sell the house legally through your trust and divide the money fairly as a family. You know we are in massive debt. If you do not authorize the sale right now, your mother and I will be out on the street by next month. Jason will go to jail for the bad checks he wrote to the marina. We are your family. You have to help us." Before I could even formulate a response to his staggering entitlement, Mr. Sterling stepped forward. He moved with the quiet, lethal grace of a man who had spent his entire legal career destroying financial predators exactly like my father. He opened his thick black leather binder one more time and withdrew a single crisp document. He placed it carefully on the table, right over the spilled coffee and the fraudulent closing disclosures. "This is not a negotiation," Thomas Mr. Sterling said, his tone stripping away any remaining illusion of control my father thought he still possessed. "Chloe is the sole active trustee of the Beatrice Family Irrevocable Trust. She is not going to divide the money with you. She is not going to pay off your luxury bridge loan. She is not going to bail your son out of his catastrophic business failures. What she is going to do is offer you one final choice." Mr. Sterling tapped the document with his expensive fountain pen. "This is a comprehensive legal waiver and a permanent cease and desist order. By signing this document, you and your wife legally surrender any and all future claims to Beatrice's estate. You waive any right to her personal property, her bank accounts, and her medical directives. Furthermore, you agree to never contact Chloe or Beatrice again by phone, by email, or in person for the rest of your natural lives. You will walk out of this building, and you will cease to exist in their world." My father stared at the paper as if it were coated in toxic poison. "And if we refuse to sign it?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of desperate defiance and absolute terror. "If you refuse to sign it?" Mr. Sterling replied smoothly. "I will walk out of this lobby and immediately hand the forged power of attorney, the fraudulent quitclaim deed, and the hospital records proving your mother was incapacitated directly to the federal prosecutor's office. You attempted to execute real estate and wire fraud across state lines using a forged signature. That is a federal felony, Thomas. The mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines are quite severe. You will not be worrying about an RV loan. You will be worrying about federal prison." The absolute humiliation in the room was suffocating. The real estate agent was staring at the floor, his face bright red, silently praying he would not lose his license for facilitating this nightmare. The young buyers were holding hands, looking at my parents with pure, unadulterated revulsion. Jason was sobbing quietly in the corner, his head buried in his hands, completely useless now that the easy money was gone. His wife Ashley had already walked out of the room, abandoning her husband the second she realized the luxury mansion and the Italian marble kitchen island were never going to happen. "Sign the paper, Dad," I said, breaking the heavy silence with a voice that sounded like shattered glass. "Sign it and walk away with your freedom, because it is the absolute last thing I will ever give you." My father looked over at my mother. Brenda was crying now, heavy, ugly sobs, but they were tears of total defeat, not remorse. She realized the sympathetic audience was entirely gone. The performance of the grieving, devoted daughter-in-law was permanently over. She had nothing left to leverage. With shaking hands, Thomas picked up the heavy fountain pen from the table. He stared at his own forged signature on the voided deed one last time before pulling the waiver toward him. He signed his name on the bottom line, his hand trembling so violently that the ink smeared across the page. He handed the pen to my mother, and she scribbled her signature next to his, a final pathetic admission of their total defeat. Mr. Sterling slipped the signed waiver back into his leather binder and snapped the brass clasps shut. The sound echoed through the silent room like a heavy steel door slamming locked. I did not say goodbye to them. I did not offer any final parting words of wisdom or anger. I simply turned my back on the people who had spent my entire life treating me like an invisible bank account and walked out of the glass-walled conference room. I walked down the carpeted hallway of the title agency, listening to my brother sobbing and my parents arguing bitterly with each other. I stepped out through the heavy front doors and into the bright morning sunshine, leaving them trapped forever in the absolute ruins of the luxury life they had tried so desperately to steal. The days following that disastrous Friday morning at the title company moved with brutal and unstoppable speed. The financial dominoes my family had so arrogantly lined up began to fall one by one, creating a spectacular chain reaction of total ruin. Jason was the first to completely collapse. He had wired $50,000 in non-refundable earnest money to the luxury home builder for his gated community mansion. He had done it with absolute arrogance, fully banking on my father handing him the stolen house funds by noon on closing day. When noon came and went with no wire transfer, the luxury home builder kept every single cent of his deposit. Jason's boat rental business was already underwater, drowning in unpaid marina lease fees and massive commercial credit card debt. The loss of that $50,000 was the final heavy anchor that dragged his entire life straight to the bottom. Within 3 weeks, he was forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. I heard through the grapevine that the day the marina seized his remaining rental boats to cover his unpaid slip fees, he sat on the wooden dock and wept. His prestigious country club membership was unceremoniously revoked when his payment methods bounced, locking him out of the elite social circles he had spent years pretending to belong to. Ashley, the wife who had happily bragged about imported Italian marble kitchen islands to anyone who would listen in the church fellowship hall, packed up her designer bags and moved back in with her parents. She claimed she simply could not handle the stress of a failing marriage and a bankrupt husband. Jason was left with absolutely nothing, sitting alone in a cheap monthly rental property, watching the easy luxury life he felt so entitled to completely evaporate into thin air. My parents fared even worse, and their fall from grace was painfully public. The high-interest $40,000 bridge loan they had taken out to purchase their luxury recreational vehicle defaulted the exact second the real estate closing was officially canceled. The predatory commercial lender they had used did not care about family misunderstandings, dramatic tears, or fake clerical errors. They cared strictly about their money, and the interest on that loan began to compound daily at a staggering and suffocating rate. Without my monthly financial subsidies to keep their daily lives afloat, and without the stolen $650,000 to bail them out, Thomas and Brenda were entirely trapped in a cage of their own making. 2 months later, the absolute humiliation they had tried to avoid finally arrived. They were forced to put their own pristine, perfectly manicured suburban home on the market just to avoid bank foreclosure and pay off the predatory recreational vehicle debt. Because they needed the cash immediately to avoid crushing legal penalties, they had to accept an offer well below market value. The people who had spent their entire lives obsessing over neighborhood appearances were reduced to hosting a desperate estate sale on their front lawn. They had to sell their own premium furniture, my father's expensive golf clubs, and my mother's cherished china sets just to scrape together moving expenses. I was told their neighbors walked through the yard sale whispering, casting judgmental glances at the patriarch who had been exposed as a fraud. Their affluent suburban church community, the same congregation Pastor Dave had asked to pray for their incredible financial sacrifices, quickly learned the truth about why the real estate sale fell through. The social fallout was absolute and merciless. My parents were quietly excluded from prayer circles and fellowship dinners. Their carefully crafted image of middle-class perfection and moral superiority was permanently shattered. They ended up renting a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the far edge of the city, a place with thin walls, faded linoleum floors, and absolutely no prestige. I heard through a distant cousin who still occasionally texted me that my father was forced to take a minimum wage job as a greeter at a local hardware store just to make the monthly rent. My mother, the woman who had happily sipped wine while declaring I had no life anyway, was desperately trying to sell her remaining designer clothes and luxury handbags on internet resale sites just to buy groceries. They were finally living the exact reality they had so callously tried to force onto my grandmother. Meanwhile, Grandma Beatrice flourished in ways that felt like a genuine miracle. The private luxury rehabilitation center I had transferred her to provided the exact environment she needed to heal with dignity. Surrounded by compassionate nurses, dedicated physical therapists, and a beautiful, peaceful courtyard garden, she slowly regained her speech and her mobility. I visited her every single afternoon. We would sit by the large bay windows in her suite, playing cards and drinking herbal tea, a stark and beautiful contrast to the terrifying, sterile humming of the intensive care unit where this nightmare began. Her care was completely and securely funded by the trust accounts I actively managed, ensuring she never had to worry about a single medical bill or insurance premium ever again. When she was finally strong enough to understand the full scope of what her son had attempted to do, she did not weep for him. She simply held my hand, looked me straight in the eye, and thanked me for honoring her trust and protecting her legacy. Once she was permanently settled and thriving in a stunning assisted living suite, I legally sold the house on Oakwood Drive in my official capacity as the acting trustee. I did it the right way. I hired a legitimate real estate broker, ensured a spotless historical title search, and negotiated a fair and binding contract. The property actually sold for $20,000 above the original asking price. Every single dime from that legitimate sale went directly back into the Beatrice family irrevocable trust. That money is now carefully invested, generating enough passive income to secure her absolute comfort and top-tier medical care for the rest of her natural life. She is safe, she is happy, and she is completely protected from the predators who once called themselves her devoted children. As for me, I kept the promise I made to myself in that glass-walled conference room. I never spoke to my parents or my brother again. I signed no formal waivers, but I enforced an absolute and permanent boundary. I blocked their phone numbers. I routed their frantic, guilt-tripping emails directly to my spam folder, and I completely severed the toxic tether that had choked me for my entire adult life. They tried to reach out a few times during their financial collapse, leaving desperate voicemails from borrowed phones, begging me to authorize just a small loan from the trust to save them from eviction. I deleted every single message without a second thought. I felt absolutely no guilt. The icy composure that had allowed me to dismantle their fraud had settled into a profound and lasting peace. I took the hard lessons I learned and aggressively applied them to my own future. I stopped clipping coupons just to pay someone else's exorbitant credit card bills. I stopped draining my emergency savings to fix a roof I did not own. Instead, I saved my income. I expanded my freelance auditing business, taking on high-value corporate clients who respected my time and my expertise. Exactly 1 year after the canceled closing, I finally bought my own home. It is a beautiful, modest house in a quiet neighborhood with a bright yellow front door and a massive kitchen where I love to cook. I host dinners for my friends, the chosen family who actually value my presence and celebrate my successes without asking for a handout. My home is filled with light laughter and an overwhelming sense of safety. There is no crying over unpaid family debts, no emotional manipulation, no silent exploitation. It is a sanctuary built on absolute honesty, and it belongs entirely to me. I want to take a moment to look directly at you and share a reflection that took me 32 years and a shattered family to finally comprehend. For my entire adult life, I truly believed that love was a measured transaction. I believed that if I just gave enough money, sacrificed enough of my own comfort, and swallowed my own needs quietly enough, the people who were supposed to love me would eventually recognize my value. I thought that by being the reliable, invisible spine of the family, I was earning my place at their table. I was completely wrong. Love is not a transaction. It is not a reward for being financially useful or perpetually accommodating. Blood doesn't give anyone the right to bleed you dry. Setting boundaries isn't a betrayal. It's survival. If someone demands that you set yourself on fire just to keep them warm, they do not love you. They are simply using you to avoid facing the cold reality of their own choices. Many of you watching this have spent decades playing the role of the reliable caretaker. You have bailed out grown children who refuse to work, subsidized siblings who treat your bank account like a public charity, and sacrificed your own retirement security to maintain a false sense of family harmony because you are terrified of aging alone. You are not required to be the financial beast of burden for entitled people who outright refuse to carry their own weight. You are not obligated to subsidize the luxury lifestyles of family members who view your lifelong sacrifices as their inherent right. 1.docx. You have the absolute, undeniable right to protect your peace, your hard-earned assets, and your future. If the people who raised you, or the siblings who grew up beside you, call your self-respect a betrayal, if they label your financial independence as an act of cruelty, then they never actually deserved your loyalty in the first place. You are allowed to walk away from toxic family dynamics, regardless of how old you are or how much time has passed. You are allowed to stop funding your own exploitation. You are allowed to finally choose yourself. I know there are people watching this right now who are carrying the crushing weight of a family that only values them for what they can explicitly provide. Have you ever been the designated financial scapegoat of your family? Have you ever been told that you are causing unnecessary drama simply because you refuse to be used as a human checkbook anymore? How did you finally draw the harsh line in the sand and take your power back from the people who tried to continuously diminish you? Please drop your stories in the comments section below. I read every single one of them, and I know from personal experience that sharing your truth can give someone else the exact courage they desperately need to finally stand up for themselves. If my journey resonated with you, if you believe in the power of undeniable justice and watching karma systematically dismantle the wicked, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story about breaking generational curses and reclaiming your life. Remember, your fundamental worth is not defined by what others can illegally extract from you. Your worth is inherent, it is absolute, and it is yours to fiercely protect. Stay strong, hold your boundaries firm, and always take care of yourself.